Hello, Sharon.
Hello.
How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm in New York City.
Where you have not been for quite some time, as I understand it. Is that right?
Uh, there was a large gap. I was here a few weeks ago, but before then it had been about 8 months. So yeah.
Well, just in time for the hot and sticky summer, where what we're discussing today will be extra beneficial for those who are trying to maintain peace and compassion during the sweaty summer months in New York. Audience, it's wonderful to have all of you here. I can see that we've got a lot of folks streaming in. If you could do me a favor and let me know in the chat if you can see us and hear us. We just want to make sure that all of the wisdom transmitted today will be received through our internet channels here. Also, let us know where you're tuning in from. I know our very special guest today is known across many geographic regions, so would love to get a sense of where you all are joining us from today. So let us know in the chat. Okay, thank you so much, Carolyn and Chris. Looks like our tech is working, which is step one to a successful session. Oh, great. And we've got both coasts of North America represented here, Princeton, New Jersey, Vancouver, BC. Hoping that you all are staying cool. In Northern Idaho, fantastic. Okay, and Central California, Carolyn, not too far from me. I'm in San Francisco. And the other Carolyn, not too far from Sharon in Brooklyn there. All right, so my name is Ashley from the Discover team here at Teachable, and I am really excited and honestly just honored to be hosting today's session with Sharon Salzberg, who, in addition to having a list of New York Times bestselling books and a widely recognized practice for Buddhist meditation, Sharon is also a terrific educator and has brought these practices to new audiences and made the type of philosophy that may not otherwise have been so accessible to so many of us available for us to explore and deepen in our practices. And one of my favorite things about what we'll be talking about today, and what I think Sharon is so wonderful for in her work and the work that Tricycle is doing, is accessibility and inclusivity. So whether you are brand new to meditation and Buddhist philosophy and principles, or if this is a practice that you've been cultivating for a while, you'll find wisdom here today, which is my hope. So without any further ado, I will actually some more ado. Wanted to just a little more ado. There will be a replay of today's session available for all of you who have registered for the live event. So you'll get an email about that. And also you'll be able to access it through Discover's YouTube page. So feel free to like and subscribe there if you want to get if you want to be notified for when we have other events like this. And you'll also be able to access the link for today's session. And I'll be monitoring the comments. So if you have questions or if there are topics that you'd like to cover, we'll save some time for that at the end of today's session. So feel free to pass those along and I will make sure that we get to them. Now, without any further ado, I will pass it over to Sharon.
That's great. I have to look up the origin of that saying, without further ado. Okay, that's interesting. I'm not sure what that totally means. But
yeah, I don't know either.
But here we are. So I'm so delighted to be with you all. Some of the sounds of the streets of New York will probably filter through. That's taking some getting used to again. And I'm really delighted to be looking at this topic because I think there are all kinds of dimensions and aspects to it. So even the idea of a path, let alone the whole path, is pretty interesting because We tend to think often of a path as something very linear. Like, I'm not going back to the beginning ever. I'm done that. It's like 101, now I've moved on and I've advanced. But actually a path, in this sense, and certainly within the Buddhist context, it's like we're always going back and forward, and it's not considered wrong or like a disgrace to go back to the beginning. And it's almost like it's not a straight line. It's a different kind of shape. One of my friends, my colleague, Sylvia Borstein, in terms of the most historic and well-known depiction of a path in Buddhist teaching, which is the Eightfold Path, once called it the Eightfold Dot, because you're kind of not really sure, like, what's a means and what's an end. And the things that we'll talk about today can also be seen as the way to a greater state of freedom and an expression of a free mind. So we're kind of always going round and round and round. So that's interesting. It's also, it's very real. It's very practical. That's the whole point. Not something to admire from afar. In fact, one of my teachers in India once said to me, the Buddha's enlightenment solved the Buddha's problem. Now you solve yours. And it was this hugely encouraging moment for me, because it felt like maybe the first time in my life someone was looking at me and saying, you can solve your problem. You can solve the problem of the confusion and the unhappiness which has brought you to India to begin with. You can do this. And so
empowering.
It's very empowering. And it's usually important to understand that, we can have such a habit of leaving ourselves out. It's like, we're admiring someone else's work and thinking, I could never do it, or great for the Buddha 2,600 years ago sitting under a tree in India, but not for me. Or, when I've gone on book signings at different times on book tours with different of my books, people will often come up and get a book signed and say something to me like, I'm buying your book for my cousin because I could never do it.
Because I couldn't.
I can't do it, and so that's so different. This is like a lived reality, and that means being humbled often and breathing life into something that we might have admired. And that's kind of the whole point. In fact, I have a friend who's British, and he grew up in the Church of England. And he said from the time he was a young child, let's say like 8 or 9 years old, he would hear the phrase, love thy neighbor as thyself. And he said he would just be thrilled, like a thrill would go through his whole body. And then from that time, he was always in trouble, because he was always then asking, well, how do we do that? We don't like our neighbor very much, or we don't like ourselves
very much. Yeah.
Yeah. So the how is really the whole point. And it's so crucial. And so that flavor really enters into this discussion as well. This is accessible for us. It's real for us. And it means our own investment of interest and time and energy in bringing something to life. It's like a grand experiment that we do. And then maybe just the last thing I'll say about this idea of a path before we go into it is it really is a sense of integration. It's about how we live. It's things we practice, and we undertake these experiments. Like, I'm going to try, I don't know, let's say meditating 10 minutes a day for a month, or I'm going to try in speech for a month to be straightforward and not exaggerate, whatever it might be that we do. But it's about all of our life, and the inner work that we do in meditation is reflected in how we live and the choices that we make, and how we live and the choices that we make come back up in our formal meditation, because
in the dot.
Really, it's another dot, like it's like a dot and a dot. And so we're very honoring of that, that it's about this kind of integrated view of who we are. It's seamless, because we can also think of spirituality or meditation as like this thing. It's like a little compartment in our life, and we do it every Saturday, or we, sit every day.
And then we're done.
And then we're done, and it doesn't reflect anything. And that also reminds me of a time we brought one of our meditation teachers from India here to the States. And this was long ago, I think, before we'd established the Insight Meditation Society or any of the retreat centers. But still, there were growing communities across the US that were interested in meditation and coming together to meditate. And we were like so excited and proud. And we said to him at the end of this tour, like, isn't it great? Look at how many people are interested in meditation. And he said, it is great. There's just one thing. So we said, what? And he said, sometimes people in the West remind me of people sitting in a rowboat, and with great earnestness and endeavor, they row and row and row, but they refuse to untie the boat from the dock. He said a lot of people here seem to want to meditate for these great transcendent experiences and these altered states of consciousness, but they don't want to look at how they speak to their neighbor or their
not
children.
without, not willing to give up any of the other, what's on the shore.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And so it's reflective of, this path is reflective of our whole lives. There's no part left out, and there's no part too small. And that's not, dreary. That's like creative. And it's like our whole life becomes our artistic medium in this.
I love what you're saying. It's making me think about something that's been on my mind a lot lately, which is just the concept of agency and how much of it I really have and how much of it I have not embraced having for the majority of my life. And kind of like you were saying with people who think, oh, I can't do it. You can do something. You can always do something. And there is an empowering kind of energizing excitement about the way you're framing this. And like, no, there are elements in every part of your life that you can choose to kind of own your agency in. And I really appreciate that.
Yeah, I think that's usually important. In fact, if I were speaking to you from Barre, Massachusetts, which is where I have a retreat center, the Insight Meditation Society, and a house, you would see behind me a Statue of Liberty, like a little replica. So ironically enough, I'm in New York, but I don't have it here. Because she's like my idol. And I grew up in New York City, and clearly it's around the compassion and the welcome. Like, you're welcome here. Even you that no one else wants, I'll take you. You can find a home here. But I was doing some research on the Statue of Liberty for the most recent book that I wrote, because she figures in it. And I hadn't quite realized, although I must have known, I hadn't quite realized that she's actually a woman on the move. She's in mid-stride. She's taking a step.
Going somewhere.
She's going somewhere. And that's like that sense of agency. It's not
she's
just
on the path.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think what you said is so important, because we can leave ourselves out so often. And so many times, certainly in terms of external behavior, generosity, or trying to help somebody or help the world, it feels like we can never do enough. And so we don't want to do that small thing. We kind of deny its power, and yet it's very powerful. We have to do the good that we see in front of us, whether it's within ourselves in terms of a practice or externally, because they come together. Right. And even if it seems very small, it's really important. So all that figures too, I think, in the sense of the whole path.
It's a very a tension that I think there are expectations, or we impose expectations on ourselves to have to figure out that tension, to solve that problem, when really, I mean, as you're saying this, I'm thinking, yeah, no, this is a thing that exists every day, and in every moment you can choose some piece of it to embody or to leave behind. And having that compassion when maybe I'm not as successful, maybe my agency is not as successful as I would like for it to be, having that compassion and recognizing that I'm still I'm still on the path and I still have opportunities to make these choices and embody exactly what you're mentioning.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like I'll tell you what I think is the secret to the art of meditation,
Okay.
because something you just said really sparked it in my mind. And even as we embark on a path of anything, we want to change a habit, we want to learn something new, we want to make progress in something. It's not a straight shot. It's never a straight shot, because life isn't. We fall down, we have to pick ourselves up or let others help us up. We go on, or we have this huge aspiration and we forget it. We lose sight of it. We have to start over, or we, have a big dream and we overlook it, or we make a mistake, or we have we think a clear idea of a way forward and something shifts and we have to course correct. So we're always actually responding to change. And that, I think, is really the secret of meditation, as probably a lot of people have heard me say earlier. In years gone by, I went to India when I was 18 years old, from New York City. I was going to college in Buffalo, New York. And in my sophomore year, had taken an Asian philosophy course. And there were a couple of things about the course that were hugely important. One was in the Buddhist section. And I have to say, I think I really took it as happenstance. It's like there was a philosophy requirement. I had to do some philosophy course. I looked at the schedule and I thought, it's on Tuesday. That's good. I'll do that one. Get that. And of course, the course was immensely important for me. So in the section on the Buddhist teaching, they talked about that essential first noble truth of the Buddhists, that life has suffering. Life includes suffering. And a lot of people would think that's sort of a dismal saying. But in fact, for somebody like me, I'd had a very rough, traumatic childhood, like many people do. And for many people, mine was a family where this was never, ever spoken about. And so I didn't know what to do with all of those feelings inside of me. So when I heard that from the Buddha, unafraid, unashamed, saying life has suffering in it, I thought it translated into my mind as, oh, I'm not so weird. I'm not so different. I'm not so all alone.
Right.
I'm a part of things, and that was important. And then I heard that there were practices, there were methods, there were actual techniques you could do called meditation, and you could be a whole lot happier.
That would teach you how to be like the Statue of Liberty and welcoming even yourself into that.
Yeah, and open and so I looked around Buffalo, New York. I didn't see it anywhere. This was 1970. And the university had an independent study program in which if you designed a project that they approved of, you could go anywhere in the world and study for a year. So I created a project. I said, I want to go to India and study meditation. So they said, okay, great. So I went off with my student loans and my college scholarship. I'd never even been to California. And I went off to India. So there's a lot to be said about that. But
big one.
Yeah. My first meditation retreat was a 10-day retreat. I'd never practiced before, in India. Started January 7th, 1971. And the very first instruction I got was sit down and feel your breath. And we're going to go into that a little bit later, but that was the first instruction. And my first thought was, that is so stupid. Like, I came all the way to India,
I can feel my breath in New York.
Yeah, really. I could have stayed in Buffalo to feel my breath, like where's the magical, esoteric, fantastic technique that's going to totally take me out of suffering? And then I thought, how hard can this be? What'll it be, like 800 breaths or 900 breaths before my mind starts to wander? And to my absolute astonishment, it was like one breath and I'd be gone. And half a breath, maybe, and I'd be gone and I'd be way gone. And I was so frustrated. And I kept hearing, but not believing. It's okay. Because the really important moment is after you've been gone, after you've been lost, after you've blown it in effect. Can you have kindness toward yourself? Can you let go? Can you begin again? Can you start over? I mean, maybe lessons learned. It's not like you're not paying attention to the fact that you kind of went off, but those long diatribes and that sort of meanness toward ourselves, and it's exhausting and it's not onward leading. And so it was an unusual lesson, but I think is the greatest life lesson I've gotten from meditation. We're always starting over. We're always having to begin again. Let's look at how that works. How does that work best?
Let's look at how let's look at how that works.
Yeah.
And I know you're going to lead us through an exercise or a series of exercises. So just to let our audience know, I will still be checking the chat. So feel free to send along any questions you might have, but I'm going to hop off screen and let Sharon lead us all through this guided practice. But we'll come back together at the end and have some discussion and some questions and answers as well. So stick around for that.
Yeah. Okay. So I just want to say that as that path or that dot is usually described, it starts with what I call sometimes kindness. It's both that kind of kindness toward ourselves, and it's almost like an ethical stance in the world, not in a repressive, mean-spirited, puritanical way. But there's a beautiful statement from the Buddha where he said, if you truly loved yourself, you'd never harm another. And I take that really to heart in two ways. One is harming someone else is like harming ourselves, which we discover with any kind of introspection. I think journaling, psychotherapy, meditation, you realize, oh, that left a residue. That really did something within me. And also because we are capable of so much greatness, that to live a life of recklessness and separation and distancing or demeaning, I'll only feel good about myself if I can put other people down. These are all very strong conditioned tendencies. We all have one degree or another. And it leaves us with a very kind of small life and not realizing our huge potential for connection, for care, and so on. So often we look at that to begin with, like, how do I speak to others? How do I speak to myself? Can I practice some generosity, or am I kind of locked in fear? Am I truthful? Or do I have secrets, things I feel I need to hide? And all of that matters. And again, it's not to judge ourselves or put ourselves down, but to understand that how we live is going to make a difference. And again, we go through some more process of learning and changing, and then all these things become ever more natural and inevitable. It doesn't feel that good to look at somebody and realize, 10 seconds ago, I was really putting you down behind your back or whatever. So again, it's a kind of integration. And that becomes a platform for the process of meditation, where we're doing several things. We're learning how to begin again, just as I described. We're learning how to center and not get rid of thoughts and feelings, but have just a little space. And this is something I think is very important to understand, because people often view meditation as a process of getting rid of thoughts, and some of the languaging, I think, lends itself to that. We're going to quiet the mind. Well, that doesn't mean nothing happens. You might have a barrage of thinking, but you're not taking them all to heart, and you're not all entangled in them, and there's just a little bit of space. You're also not fighting them and hating them. You're not hating your own feelings. We're allowing the dignity of every feeling, even if it's fear, even if it's greed, even if it's painful, because we're developing a different relationship to it, and thereby to ourselves. Instead of shrinking away, instead of denouncing what's going on, instead of being overwhelmed with what's going on, we can have awareness and balance and compassion as we relate to whatever is happening. And that also holds true, by the way, for pleasant, glorious, beautiful feelings. which are available, and that very often we're maybe too distracted to even notice, or we have impossible standards of perfection. So nothing is ever good enough. Probably my favorite story ever to tell was about a friend of mine who took me to Washington, D.C. Some years ago to this area. I'm sure you know it, called the Basin, which has a concentration of cherry trees in it. So these all bloom at once. So that's cherry blossom season. That's like a big attraction. And she brought me there, and I was just awed. I thought, wow, this is so beautiful. It's so lovely. Like all these delicate pink blossoms and so many of them. And then my friend said, oh no, it's past the peak. And then I thought, oh no, I'm having a bad experience. This isn't good enough. It doesn't even have to be our own standards. It could be the world's, or a neighbor or a colleague or somebody. And suddenly it's not good enough. And we can also, and many of us do, and I think especially in a time like this with so much anxiety and so much overt suffering, we can feel very guilty. I can't let this in. It isn't right. There's too much pain. And I think in that sort of attitude, we are missing the whole idea of resilience and replenishment, and how depleted we can get when we honestly and needfully look at pain, but how we need to sometimes balance that out with rest, with kindness, with enjoyment. Another one of my teachers in India, one of my meditation teachers, was very kind of studious. He was very scholarly. And somebody asked him one day, why do you practice meditation? And I thought he was going to give a very kind of abstract answer based on the text and whatever. And instead he said, I practice meditation because I don't want to miss the beautiful purple flowers that are growing along the roadside. And I was like, whoa, that's a surprise and lovely. And I'm sure true, so we need to have a better relationship often with pleasure, just as we need a better relationship with pain, so we don't feel so ashamed of difficulty and so on. And that's really at the heart of meditation. It's what we call mindfulness, to be with whatever our experience is in a different way, not clinging, not pushing it away, not adding a whole lot of stuff like, this shouldn't be here. I should have gotten rid of this long ago. I need a therapist, or projecting into the future is another one. We have discomfort in our bodies. We have heartache. We have disappointment. And right away we're thinking, what's it going to feel like tonight? What's it going to feel like tomorrow? What's it going to feel like next week? So not only do we have the actual difficult feeling, physical and emotional, we have now added all that anticipation. And we're trying to bear it all at once, making it that much harder. So we learn how to be with painful feeling, pleasant feeling, even neutral feeling, just the ordinary, repetitive, routine times that we normally kind of snooze. We're numb because it's not exciting enough. It's not stimulating enough for us to feel alive. So all of that is what mindfulness is about. We center, we have some space, we have a different relationship to whatever's going on. And that does many things. I think the most popular understanding in our time is that it helps us live more fully. If we're always multitasking, for example, we're drinking, let's say there's a cup of tea, which it's not, but let's say it's a cup of tea. We're drinking the cup of tea while we're checking our email, while we're on a conference call, while we have the TV on mute and we're reading the scroll. We don't really taste that tea very much. And so we have this kind of sense of a vacuous life. We're never there. We're not connected. And it doesn't have to be that way. It's just a function of how we pay attention. And so mostly when mindfulness is described in these times, it's really emphasizing that benefit. And it's a wonderful, amazing benefit. It's really important. But classically, that might be, well appreciated. The main purpose of mindfulness is wisdom or insight, because it not only helps us inhabit our life, it helps us understand our lives. It helps us understand who we are. For example, we see that no matter how alone we feel, or cut off or lonely, the truth of life is that we live in an interconnected universe, that we don't necessarily like everybody or approve of them, but our lives have something to do with one another. And that the construct of self and other, or us and them, is a useful construct, but it's just a construct. There's also an underlying reality, which is like we. And this is not something we demand that we see or superimpose on our actual worldview. If we pay attention in a way with less clutter and fewer of those add-ons, like the projection into the future, this is what we see, that our lives have something to do with one another. We understand very personal truths. Like, something I also often talk about is sitting in meditation and looking at my own fear. So looking at fear would mean, first of all, pivoting. When we have a strong emotion of any kind, we tend to be very involved with or fascinated by the object. The story, the incident, the thing we desire, the person we desire, whatever it is. And we don't flip our attention to say, what does it feel like right now to want something so badly, to be that angry? And so we're looking at the feeling itself. What does it feel like in my body? And what's the sort of movie of it? If we're looking at strong emotion, usually these are very complex. They're very compounded. It's not just one thing. We look at anger, maybe we see sadness, maybe we see fear, maybe we see helplessness, things like that. So in doing that with my own fear, one of the things I've noticed, which was very important for me, was that unlike the world's pronouncement that we're afraid of the unknown, which of course is also true, I'm really afraid when I think I do know, and it's going to be really bad. That's all the stories I tell myself, like, well, I'm going to go back into the apartment. I won't have been there for 8 months, and it's really bad, and that's going to happen. I'm turning the water. Maybe I'll get Legionnaire's disease. That's when I get afraid. And even in the midst of that, if I remind myself, you know what? You don't know, then there's space. Then I feel relief. And so that was an important personal insight. So there are universal insights around things like we're all connected. They're very personal insights that are important for any one of us. That's kind of so crucial about mindfulness, and the gift meditation can give us is really understanding, what is strength? Maybe we've been taught all our lives that vengefulness is strength. It's a dog-eat-dog world. But is that true, actually? Look at that brittleness. Look at that sense of being cut off. Maybe we've been taught all our lives that compassion is stupid, and it makes you gullible and makes you weak and sentimental. But is that true, actually? So we have such an opportunity to really explore for ourselves the nature of happiness and the nature of sorrow and the nature of life. And that's really what meditation can bring us to. So it's how we act and the kind of kindness we use in the world, and then the effect that has on our ability to meditate and be mindful, and the way that leads to wisdom, and the way wisdom leads to a greater sense of commitment to kindness. And so there's the dot, as we go round and round. So let's do some meditation together. If you want to sit comfortably, I'm sure many of you have your own practice, and you're totally welcome to do that. I'll guide you through just a foundational exercise in meditation. Your eyes can be open, a little bit open, or they can be closed, whatever you prefer. And we can start by listening to sound, especially since I may be bringing you some New York City sounds. We'll see. Unless you're responsible for actually doing something about the sound, you can let it wash through you. And bring your attention to the feeling of your body sitting, whatever sensations you discover. See if you can feel the earth supporting you. See if you can feel space touching you. Usually we think about touching space. We think about like picking up a finger and poking it in the air. But space is already touching us. It's always touching us. We just need to receive it. Bring your attention to your hands and see if you can make the shift from the more conceptual level, like go fingers, to the worlds of direct sensation, picking up pulsing, throbbing, pressure, whatever it might be. You don't have to name these things, but feel them. And bring your attention to the feeling of your breath. Just the normal, natural breath, wherever you feel it most distinctly. At the nostrils, at the chest, or at the abdomen. You can find that place, bring your attention there, and just rest. See if you can feel one breath. Without concern for what's already gone by, without leaning forward for even the very next breath, just this one. As images or sounds or sensations or emotions arise, if they're not very strong, if you can stay connected to the feeling of the breath, just let them flow on by. You're breathing. It's just one breath. But if something is very strong and it pulls you away, you get lost in thought, spun out in a fantasy, or you fall asleep, truly don't worry about it. The most important moment, remember, is the next moment after you've been gone, after you've been lost, where we practice letting go gently. We practice beginning again with some kindness toward ourselves. In the next few minutes, no matter how many times you might have to let go of some distraction, bring your attention back to the breath, it's fine. Isn't it amazing? No matter where our attention goes for however long, we can always begin again. And when you feel ready, you can open your eyes or lift your gaze, and we'll end the meditation. So thank you so much for all that. That was a lovely interlude in the middle of an afternoon. And we have time just to have a conversation if you have any questions or comments.
As we are welcoming everyone back, I will return the thanks. That was a lovely interlude in the middle of the day. I'm not sure how it went for our audience. Would love to hear your experience with that exercise. Mine began with a very persistent car alarm happening right outside my window, which I thought was perfect. A couple of things really struck me. I've done. I don't have a consistent meditation practice, but I have at various points. And what was striking to me about this exercise, some things that you said that I hadn't done before that kind of shifted my perspective a bit. When you mentioned drawing attention to your hands, but not thinking about them in terms of the constructs of fingers, but rather the sensation. I just immediately physically felt differently. It was noticing pulsing or just sensation, which I think is a very, and that combined with the think about space touching you, Those two things felt related to me, but also very new and like a hint as to, oh, mindfulness, right? That's what it is. It was like a dimension of it that I hadn't
Mhm.
that I hadn't thought of before. It's like space is touching you as you are touching it.
Yeah, no, that's great. The first thing you said about sensation is something that mindfulness teaching really relies on a lot, because it is not only interesting, and kind of more alive and awakening, but it is a direct conduit to insight. So here's an example. If I'm holding up this glass and you asked me what I was feeling, I could say very flippantly, I'd say, well, I'm feeling the glass.
Right.
And that's a good answer because that's what we've agreed to call it. That's conventional, consensual reality. If I said I'm feeling the lampshade, everyone would worry about me, right? But there's a certain stagnation to, I'd call it a glass yesterday, call it a glass today, I'll call it a glass tomorrow. Whereas if you asked me what I was feeling and I said hardness, vibration, coolness, that's a direct road to constant change, seeing constant change.
Yeah.
So we rely on sensation quite a lot. And the second thing, in terms of feeling space, I actually was studying with a Tibetan teacher. And I don't know, maybe there were 50 of us in the room. And he said, now touch space. And I swear every single one of us
Just did this.
And he laughed. He thought it was like the funniest thing he'd ever seen. And so it's not just theoretical. I thought, oh, I do that too.
Yeah, it is. And when you said that, you're like, we do think about this idea of poking the, touch space is poking the air. But of course, when you say it, it's obvious how silly that is. Yeah. But sometimes it does take that in this almost in an inverse way from what you were saying at the beginning of the session about how we often leave ourselves out. This is an instance almost of when we forget that there is other than ourselves, and we are being touched by space and don't need to do this.
Yeah. I mean, that's why, meditation is not actually totally equal to relaxing, because we're also cultivating energy and clarity and things like that. But that's the relaxed part of it, is that we don't need to do something. In fact, early in my practice, when the instruction was sit and feel your breath, and I was so dismissive, I thought, this is in truth not that easy to do. And one of the reasons was I saw, was that almost as soon as this breath was happening, I'd kind of gear up to get ready for the next 50 breaths. And I was very hypervigilant. I was very scared. A lot had already happened to me in my life. I didn't know what might happen next. And I thought I had to be ready for it. And so for me, in those days, balance looked like settle back. Let the breath come to you. I used to say to myself, you're breathing anyway. All you need to do is feel it. Because I had so much performance anxiety. It's like I'd never done it before. So settle back. Space is already touching you. You can relax.
You can relax into it. It's funny that you mentioned that, because the other observation that I had that felt very strong to me was exactly that, when you said, just this breath, don't think about the next one. And it arrested me because I was already thinking about the next breath, and it was like a physical, oh shoot, I don't know if I can do a breath and not be thinking about the next breath. And that is very true in life also for me. It's a thing to constantly relearn, begin again, as you said, that I can lean into it and just be there while this one breath is happening, which is kind of, to me, feels very counter. I'm curious from our audience if this is something that, does this come naturally to you? Is this, what's your experience in dealing with one breath at a time? Because to me, it feels very counterintuitive to especially Western culture and society. So it was that was an especially noticeable moment for me as well.
Well, quite a few of our issues, I think our challenges are made easier by tackling them not in their entirety, like this giant thing, but sort of feeling like, what can I do in this moment?
Mm-hmm.
And I remember once I was teaching up in the Insight Meditation Society, and the person I was teaching with was someone who had begun her own meditation practice there, and I'd been one of her teachers. And so she was giving a talk, and I was sitting there listening, and she said, however many years before, I began my meditation practice here. It was my first retreat. And I went into this period, because all kinds of things can come up, beautiful and challenging and everything in between. She said, I went through this period of just like crazy restlessness. And so I went in to see Sharon, and I said to her, has anyone ever died of restlessness doing meditation? And because I had no memory of this at all, and then she said, so then I was really interested, like, what did I say, 20 years ago or something? And she said, not from just one moment at a time of it. And I thought that was a really good answer. Wow. That was really good.
Wow. Yeah, that's
sort of the point.
That works on a lot of levels. That's so funny that was quoted back to you. What an interesting experience to have something like that quoted back to you.
Yeah.
Not from one moment of the time. That's very cheeky, Sharon. Very cheeky.
I think it works.
But yes, very apt. I'm seeing we have some comments coming in here too. Chris is saying it took a year to get the hang of it, of the concept of one breath at a time. So I'm going to take that as an optimistic stance of, okay, it's as you practice and cultivate attention and I imagine that in the same way that athletes build muscle memory for certain actions, that there is some equivalent of that to leaning into it, like you said. And Emye, forgive me if I'm not pronouncing that correctly, says one breath at a time is a difficult practice for me as well, in meditation and in life in a bigger sense. And yeah, how many times have I felt like your student? Is it possible to die from just this like pulsing need to move to the next thing, even if I don't know what it is or why I'm going there yet?
Right.
Yes, that is a very, very helpful lesson, it seems like, for our audience as well. I would love to. So we also have, we've got a couple more minutes left. So please, audience, first join me in just thanking Sharon for being here today and for leading us in that guided meditation, and also either introducing us to or reintroducing us to some of these foundational concepts that not only can and will impact our meditation practice, but also, as we've just discovered and uncovered, can have tremendous impact on the day-to-day, moment-to-moment lives that we are living. So please join me in thanking Sharon. And if you do have additional questions, we've got time, I think, for a couple more. So if you wanted to share those, by all means. Before we, while we're kind of collecting folks' last thoughts and questions, Sharon, I'm wondering if you might share a little bit about the course, the whole path course, and just the structure of it, and what folks might expect, or who might benefit from experiencing this course. And I'll put the link in again too, just so everyone has it.
Well, I like to think that the approach I try to take in offering teachings or ideas is really going to help somebody either begin a meditation practice or renew or sustain a meditation practice, because it's one's own experience that's the most important thing. And we have a sense of community, I think, doing a course, and we have an ability to really look at our experience in a kinder way, and I think with the right perspective. It's so hard, when sometimes I meet people, well, back in the day when we were meeting people physically, at a party or some situation, and I'd be introduced as a meditation teacher, and people would say, "Oh, I tried that once, I failed at it." And we don't believe you ever can fail at it. You might have a difficult experience, just as you might have a lovely experience, and it's always changing, but you cannot fail at it, because what's important is not sort of what comes up, but how we learn to relate to what comes up. Can we bring some presence and balance and love to whatever our experience is, and that we are capable of doing. And so I really urge people to try to practice in a context of understanding, because we tend to bring those habits right into everything, self-judgment and so on, and not realize that, okay, this is natural. It's natural for your mind to wander. It's not a disgrace. You haven't failed. The question is, can you come back? Can you come back a little sooner? Can you come back more gracefully? Can you come back with a better sense of humor? Things like that. So that's what I think this course is really about. It's about the seamlessness of how we act and how we practice these kind of inner disciplines, and the ways they keep weaving in and out. And hopefully, I think my goal is that people will emerge with a much greater sense of confidence, their ability to practice and bring their practice into their lives.
It's interesting that you mentioned the community aspect of this experience, and not, obviously there is a very solitary component of your meditation practice, but in so many of these events that I host with creators for Discover, people bring to these sessions, maybe it's about, we did one yesterday, for example, that was about entrepreneurs, folks who are trying to build a business as a solo entrepreneur. And the number of comments that said, someone said, "I'm feeling so much more normal now, just by virtue of having been told that, oh yes, I had this experience also, or this challenge comes up for me every day." And there is something very powerful about just being in the same space, whether it's virtual or in person, and recognizing that, when my mind wanders, it's not because I am a failure. It is because
That's right.
we are learning how to do a thing, and having that collective support. I hadn't thought about it in that way, but I think that's a really beautiful concept for why we do this with other people, right? And we've got a couple, just as we finish, one question from Flannery here about tips for reconciling. I think this is interesting. Reconciling the tension between interconnectedness and self-empowerment and agency, which has come up just in this discussion today. Is there a way that you approach that, or how do you think about it? Or
I think, I don't see it so much as a tension. It's almost like two different aspects of things. And if you think of interconnectedness as sort of like soup, like we all disappear, it's not going to work, because that's also not what it's like. The truth is that our lives are intertwined. Like if I go into a workplace or an organization to teach, my favorite question is, how many other people need to be doing their job well for you to be able to do your job well? And sometimes people don't get it. So I say, okay, this of course depends on how you work too. I said, did you commute? Are you dependent on a trains engineer? Are you dependent on a car mechanic doing their job? Are you dependent on a bus driver? Are you dependent on, do you walk to work? Are you dependent on, did you eat today? Like, how do you think the food got? And so we begin to see that our lives are connected. But we maintain our individuality at the same time. So they're both true at the same time. And there are many things we learn to hold like that. We look at a tree and we see, oh, that's just a tree. It's like an entity there. But we can also look at a tree and sense the function of the soil in which it's growing and everything that affects the nature of the soil, like the rainfall, and everything that affects the rainfall, which we know is a lot of things. And suddenly you look at the tree in another level and it's a network of relationship. That's what it is. And they're both true.
That makes a lot of sense. And I'm wondering if, Flannery, if what you're picking up on is that, can I still be a successful trunk if the soil is damaged in some way? And I think even just the act of thinking about that and thinking through how you want to react as a fully self-contained individual, but one who is part of this interconnected universe, like there's a full amount of agency. There's always a full amount of agency, even within the interconnectedness. That's kind of, is that what?
Yeah. I mean, I think, the benefit we have is wisdom, right? It's insight. So like, if our definition of agency, because this is what we've been taught, is that it's a dog eat dog world and you don't help anybody else because they're not going to help you. And
get out of the way.
It doesn't matter who you step on your way to the top, then that's a problem, and it's so often taught and believed and, and practiced. And so we look at the world, no wonder, and so with the benefit of really seeing much more clearly, we strive for excellence and we want to do the best we can. If we have a craft or a trade, we want to do it to the utmost. And we have an edge, we even go to the edge. And at the same time, we're not confused about what it's like when we care about others and we maybe mentor others or want to help others, or who we are dependent on, that we're not sort of the Lone Ranger, in fact,
right.
That's just not true.
Or there's, I don't know why I just thought of this, something you said sparked it, or even just the practical experience of road rage, for example. I, from the East Coast, learned how to drive in New Jersey, and driving on the West in California is often frustrating for me. People don't understand that the left lane is for passing. But I go through this experience thinking, oh, I would like not to have road rage. At the same time, I'm never going to control how all of these other people drive, but I still, there is an interconnectedness here. And I can either, my self-empowered response can either be to give in to that rage, or it can be to take a step back and examine whether I might want to explore something different. It's really fascinating. I wish we are about at time here, Sharon. I know that this is just the beginning always, right? We're always beginning again, as you said. And I'm hoping that it looks from the comments like our audience is just really, really grateful for this time, for the exercise. You will have access to a replay of this, folks. So if you missed any portion of it, don't fret, you will get a link to the replay. You can also replay it on the Discover YouTube channel. And the link to the course Sharon mentioned, The Whole Path, is pinned to the top of the comments. And I also put it in the chat. So definitely check that out. There's a really generous and lovely deal on it for those folks who registered for today's event. And I'm excited and, like I said, honored to have shared this experience with all of you. And Sharon, of course, thank you so much for the work that you continue to do, that you have been doing to guide so many of us to a place that is aligned and compassionate. And I'm really grateful that you shared your time with us today and your wisdom. So thank you so much for that.
Well, thank you so much. It was lovely to meet you.
Likewise, everyone, I hope that you have a great rest of your day. And we will see you here next time. Take care, everybody.